Hey guys, why am I heading out on one of the coldest mornings of the winter so far? It's because I got a tip from a gentleman who unfortunately had a relative pass away who was an engineer, I think with Bell Labs for many, many years, and he has a lot of equipment. So I am going to check it out and see what there is to see. Oh man, time for the second car load. I didn't get any footage of the first car load, but we'll talk about it when I get back home and regroup. Basically, the same gentleman who I got a bunch of TVs from on the 4th of July, a year and a half ago, or no, probably 2.5 years ago now. Had a relative who passed away. He was an engineer at Bell Labs for many years. Was a ham radio operator, tinkerer, and had all kinds of test equipment. So he invited me to come over and go through it. And he was happy to have it go to a good home rather than end up in a landfill. Briefly, I got a couple Collins communication receivers. One of them, I'm pretty darn sure is operational because it was a part of his ham rig. I think the other one might have been for spare parts, but they both look pretty complete. Got a whole bunch of tubes, got some VTVMs, some equipment I've never seen or used before, a bunch of LC meters, a Morse code practice kit, a whole bunch of spare parts and wire and lamps and bench grinder, frequency counter, a bunch of signal generators, books, manuals. So this is the second car load. I'll need to have some help to do one final pass. Want to get a bookcase and a whole bunch of technical books, including some QSTs going back to 1925. I didn't know they went back that far. And boy, there's all kinds of nifty light bulbs and neon lights and more meters. And there's also a rack, which is something I've wanted for a long time because I've been accumulating more and more rack equipment, like this power supply, and I've got RF modulators at home, and well, some stuff you guys haven't seen yet, but are going to in the near future. But that rack, it's way too heavy for me to carry. It probably weighs 200 pounds, so that's why I need some help with that. But anyways, I gotta get my car loaded. It's like 10 degrees outside, so oh boy, it's gonna be a lot to go through, but I think it's gonna make for a whole series of really interesting YouTube videos. Here's a quick peek at some of the other stuff. It's too late at night, too cold. I'll go through it more in the morning. I just wanted to give you... I want to give you, and I want to take a look at myself again at what all is here. A number of things are early Hewlett-Packard. In fact, I think I have that right there. I think might be Hewlett-Packard's very first device they ever sold. I think I might have the second one, too, which might be that up there. They're audio generators. And that is an RF generator, a rather nice one. It actually shows you percent modulation and dBm output levels. And you can actually choose your internal modulation between two different frequencies and a nice big display. Just hope everything... I actually have pretty good... This guy maintained his stuff well and he used it. So I think the odds are pretty good that it works. Tons of tubes, including a whole mess of 12AX7s, AU7s, AT7s. Basically, he had a lot of tubes that go with his equipment. 2 scopes. The scope I wanted, they were all 500 series scopes, which are old, crusty, like 20 megahertz scopes. But he had one that had accepted plugins. And he had some of the extra plugins, and those I have, but somebody else took the scope that was there before me, and they didn't take the plugins for some reason. Oh well. This is a really cool device. It is a Q analyzer for analyzing coils, and this goes with it. It's a standard coil. So this will tell you the microhenries or henries. It'll tell you the Q factor and all kinds of interesting, cool stuff. I think it's a decibel meter. He had a lot of like distortion analyzer kind of stuff. And a bunch of different types of LC meters and L meters and bridges. He was, I think I mentioned earlier, in the ham radio. Bunch of more tubes. Yeah, I know, just wanted more tubes. This is a really cool box. These are a bunch of Decade boxes. I saw that he had some Decade resistors, but I kind of wasn't that interested. But then I saw that he had Decade capacitors and Decade inductors, like a whole family, all from even Decade electrolytic capacitors. Basically, you can stick these into a circuit. In particular, when you're trying to tweak a circuit to make it work the way you want to, you can play around with these guys. There's a Decade inductor in henries, 0 to 10 henries. Now for the third carload, and generally speaking, this is more quality over quantity. I grabbed another scope, and I didn't realize there was a third one, so now there's 3 Tech 515As. Got the second Collins parts container, but the real treasure was going through all the little drawers and picking out all the little fine things, especially now that I'm working on building a new workbench. I realized there was a lot of stuff I'm missing out on, like chassis punches, a solder pot. I got some cool vintage gear, man, that's got some heft to it. A good old Bakelite 250 watt Weller soldering gun. Ginormous American Beauty soldering iron for those chassis jobs. And lots of little like screws and screwdrivers and files and wire cutters and lots of needle nose pliers. There's a little solder pot. I gotta find a high temperature cord for it. Got a visor for scope. And some other lots of little interesting tidbits we'll be going over in the months to come. Here's a side view. Got there's a Greenlee chassis punches, nibbling tool. Got some meters, got some spaghetti tubing, high voltage sign, because of course you can't have too many high voltage signs. Lots of little bulbs. Somewhere in one of these bags is a lifetime supply of solder. Here are many files. Sorry for the horrible camera work. Trust me, we will be going over this for a long time to come. Here's that solder. It's like a 10-pound roll. This should last me the rest of my life, to be honest. 60-40, good size. I gotta see what I currently have. I think the stuff I've been using might be 63-37. So I'll have to make sure that this is the right stuff, and I'm gonna make sure it's rosin core. But I got some other rolls of solder too, I think. So, yeah, lots and lots of neat stuff. One hopefully final trip tomorrow But he's coming with a pickup truck. He's going to help me get that 18-inch steel rack out and over here. That's going to be an immense help because I have about a dozen items that are rack mounted. They're all going to get right put into that, and it's on wheels. That will be a tremendous help to organize. This is going to be so interesting, I think, for all of us to go through. There's just boxes filled with stuff like this. All these fascinating devices and parts and equipment. Excuse the chaos. I want to present everything that I picked up in an orderly, manageable manner, ideally one item at a time. But there is one thing I can't avoid talking about, and that is this rack, which is beautiful. I speculate the 40s or the 30s, black wrinkle finish. Well, first, what is a rack? Well, a lot of equipment comes in both benchtop and rack configurations. Here's a good example. It's frequency counter, which has sides and a kickstand, so you can put it on a workbench. These sides come off, and you could get a rack version. A rack version is something that fits into this. I think it's 19 inches wide or thereabouts, and they have standard spacing for screws on the side. And it's been a standard for decades and decades. To this day, it's used for, well, computer servers and DJ musical equipment and PAs and whatnot. And I have both new and old, and I've wanted to get a rack for a very long time. I was thinking about getting one like a mobile DJ might use for my blonder tongue video modulators and some other gear. So when I saw this, I just had to have it. The issue was, or is, that it's 6 feet tall, which leaves barely any margin for error down here. Had to take the wheels off. The stand, or the rack cabinet itself doesn't have wheels, but somebody had made up a stand, maybe welded it together with some casters on it. I had to take it off. And even so, like look what the ductwork is. We had to take it in like a coffin sideways and find an area where we could stand it upright. So I'm limited with where I can put it. And I do have some slides for the carpeting. It's not going to live here. I just want to explore it. There are a whole bunch of holes on either side for mounting things. I guess there are two standards. I think more commonly today is a 1032 size screw. But this is 1224, and I heard that's more common for aluminum cabinets, but this is steel. And the spacing is odd. Like it was drilled for several standards, I don't know. And the equipment that came in it, at least some of it, wasn't attached to these holes. Let's see if I can show you any. There are angle irons that were mounted. So you could just slide something in like this Collins receiver. There are no screws holding it in. I want to use screws. So I went on to Amazon and I ordered up a whole bunch, and they fit perfectly. That's what these are. I'm going to be mounting a bunch of stuff in here. For now, for sure, some of the stuff I picked up there. And I'd like to put some of my other stuff, my newer stuff, but some of it doesn't fit. This blonder tongue modulator does, but the Drake below it does not. It's off by like a 1/16 of an inch. So it's kind of wedged in there. It just won't fit. And neither would the receiver if I had the top on it. You can see it's just going right up to the edge. I haven't measured this yet. It's heavy steel, very heavy. 150, 200 pounds for this cabinet. There's no way it warped or anything, and it seems to be a uniform distance from top to bottom. It might just be so old that standards were slightly different. I don't know. But I'll do what I can to make what I want to put in here fit. These modulators, it's aluminum. If I had to, I could file off a 1/16 of an inch, and I could make it fit, in other words. And then there's this humble little microphone, which I think is the star of the entire collection. We'll talk more about it. I'm sure a lot of you recognize it for what it is, which is an early RCA ribbon microphone, fairly rare, fairly valuable. Eventually I'd like to try getting it working and, hey, do the audio in one of my videos using the microphone. And then there are these cool microphones I haven't had the chance to research yet, but they look early and cool. And it just goes on and on and on with so many cool gadgets and devices. And then there's this trunk filled with all sorts of awesome ham radio books, electronics books, theory, TV, radio, QSTs going back to 1925, I think. So much to go through. So as I probably already mentioned a dozen times now, I need to go through all this stuff, and I plan on going through item by item, box by box, and so on in detail rather than trying to just quickly blow through all of it. So I need to research a lot of this stuff. For example, I just looked up what the heck this thing is last night. I mean, I knew it was a Q meter, which measures the quality of a coil, and you can measure the inductance and so on. Turns out to be a pretty nifty device for winding your own coils, but as far as how it operates, how it's used, theory of operation, and then does it even work? That's the kind of stuff I want to explore in each of the videos. The other thing that may not be apparent to me is that a lot of these devices, one, they're older than I realized. Like a lot of this stuff I thought was from the 50s, 60s. It's more like 30s, 40s. A lot of it is very, impractical, let's say, to use in this day and age. Like some of these gigantic boxes are just a voltmeter or a resistance bridge, which a pocket multimeter will exceed the accuracy and is far more practical to use. So I'm very happy to have it. I very much looking forward to going through it, playing around with it. I don't expect to be using all this stuff in day-to-day projects. This is the kind of stuff that actually really excites me, because there are all sorts of parts and things in these drawers that they're not made anymore. They're hard to come by. And some really, really high quality, made in America tools. Like, remember when I was doing the predictors a while ago and I was trying to find cable clamps? Well, now, I have a whole assortment right here. And tube sockets and tube shields and just all kinds of stuff. This will be invaluable in my upcoming projects. I have a lifetime supply of solder and more soldering guns than I will ever need. I think this toolbox will be a great place to start in a separate video. The reason I want to start with this is, a few reasons. One, it's all mechanical, so I don't think I need to do any research before I go through this, or while I'm going through this, to understand what I'm looking at. Two, I was looking for something to put stuff into, and this was already half filled, and I just added more tools to it. I don't know what all was in here. I know basically what I added to it, and it's some good stuff, and I want to share it with you. But I don't know what all is in here, so I'm kind of excited. That's a really nice toolbox. What I want to end this video off with is to relate my experience, maybe share some advice. If you ever find yourself in a similar situation. So that was quite the experience, and I've been in somewhat similar situations a few times. You may recall 8 years ago, 8 or 9 years ago, I had an opportunity to get into the old TV radio lab in Chicago, Portage Park neighborhood. It's a place I'd been to back in the 80s as a teenager, and I knew of the place. I had no idea that all these years later it was still in existence, and that I'd ever got an opportunity to go through it and grab what I could. That was kind of my first opportunity of having limited time and limited space and being overwhelmed by a whole bunch of stuff, and doing it in the dead of winter, absolute coldest time of year to do it. It just occurred to me, yeah, I mean, the two biggest opportunities I've had were the worst possible weather. At least it wasn't pouring rain. But during this process, we went down to single digits. We got about a foot of snow, especially on the last day when we got that rack with a pickup truck. Well, we survived. We made it. But from that first experience, I mean, to this day, I still like, oh, why did I grab that? There were hundreds and thousands of tubes I left behind, for example, because it was overwhelming and I got numb to it. And it was like, okay, I've grabbed 1,000 tubes and I'm leaving 5,000 behind. It's like at some point, it's like you just get overwhelmed by the amount of it. But then when you start going through it and you think, ah, geez, why did I grab more of this stuff? So, and even with that experience, I still have some regret about this trip, even though, all right, so I went 4 times. The first time I went, and it was fairly far away, and I just had my car. I didn't have a trailer, or I didn't rent a truck or anything. Partly because my storage space is fairly full. I just kind of started straightening out the basement. I didn't want to fill it back up with stuff immediately. So for my first time I went, I had some photos in hand, and that's all I knew. So I wanted to kind of do a reconnaissance and size up what was there. So as soon as I walked in there, I was a bit overwhelmed by all the stuff, and the guy who let me in, it was his uncle, and he wanted to tell me about, oh, here's, you know, when I was a kid, I remembered this and that, and I absolutely got distracted for the first half hour or so. But then I kind of refocused, and I said, okay, don't get distracted by all the shiny objects. Walk through the whole place. Start taking a mental inventory of the stuff that I have to take, the stuff I'd like to take, the stuff I can't take. And that night, we pulled out the stuff that I absolutely knew I wanted and put it into another room, kind of a staging area. And that day, I took 1 carload and came back later that night and got the rest of it. But even so, when I got home and went through it, I realized I left one of the Collins receivers behind. And if that had been my only opportunity to get into the property, I would have been PO'd. So when I went back the second time, my first priority was to get anything that I knew that I missed. And once I did that, I went back through a little more carefully on another carload. And that was mostly equipment and tubes. Third time I went, I was like, okay, I got all the big stuff, all the stuff with handles, the equipment, the stuff that plugs into the wall. What I didn't get any of was any of the accessories. I didn't get any of the cables, power cords, documentation, and so on. So that was my goal the third time, was to get all the small stuff, the stuff that you could easily miss. And to make sure that I went through every single drawer and cubby and cabinet and so on. And so I actually didn't even have a full carload. But I think the third trip was the most fruitful, because that's when I went through every single tool, every drawer, every toolbox, and got all the stuff that I know is going to make my life as repairing and restoring easier. And I like the idea of, I'm going to keep using the tools that he used that are 50 years old and really high quality. The fourth trip is when I had my buddy with me in a pickup truck, and we got the rack. And he grabbed some stuff. And we went through everything again. And he's the one who found the microphone. So after walking through this property 3 times, both myself and basically the owner, neither one of us saw it. And if my buddy hadn't been poking around in a corner, probably would have gotten tossed. So if you're finding yourself in a similar situation, I suggest the very first thing you do is don't start grabbing stuff. If unless you're really under the gun, is to do reconnaissance, walk through the whole thing, do a triage, and make a list of, okay, these are the things that I have to have that I know I can handle. And maybe cross off some things, like there was a metal lathe. That would have been amazing. It weighs probably over 2 tons or something like that. I mean, that was just, plus it had already been spoken for, but it was also a CNC machine. Inconceivable. So I didn't even allow myself to get, to dream about it, because I didn't want to, make things more complicated. And, I knew that this, whatever got left behind would get trashed, so I was also trying to think of, okay, what's some stuff that I don't have to have, I don't really have a use for, but it's a nice piece of history, and I don't want it to get lost. With all that said, I still have regrets, because I didn't take any hardware. I didn't take any nuts and bolts and screws, and I absolutely can use them. I'm sure there was a bucket full of screws for that rack, but I had to go out and buy some, because I got burned out, quite honestly, by the 4th, 5th. Well, I was in a building 4 times, but I made 5 trips. I'm still exhausted, and it's a couple days later now. Aching back, sore knees, all that stuff. So I don't know if my advice is helping any, because even with all that, I still if I could have gone one more time, or if I could just get grabbed a few more things, if I just looked at it. Okay, I'll give you an example. There were probably over 200 cool vintage meters, Simpson and Weston and whatnot. I think I grabbed 5. So okay, I will never use these. I don't have any device that uses them. The scale on them is odd, but they've never been used. They have beautiful printing on them, Art Deco fonts and stuff. But I can't take everything. He had thousands of pounds of stock, like steel and copper and brass and bronze and stuff. What am I going to do with that? So I left it all behind. But hey, I don't mean to make it sound negative. It was an amazing experience. I'm deeply honored and grateful to have gotten what I've got. And most of all, I am very excited to be sharing this all with you, as I think it's going to take, just guesstimating, I mean, easily a year to go through all this stuff, to do it properly. And I have some things I know you guys are going to really enjoy. Stuff that I've never seen, and probably a lot of you haven't either. So, with that being said, I hope this video wasn't too random and scrambled and rambling. That's it for now.